It's very easy to allow yourself to get sucked down a rabbit hole of personal finance blogs, podcasts, and videos that talk about all these different little tips and strategies to better your financial lot in life. And to be clear, I don't think that there's anything wrong with that inherently. As far as I'm concerned, we never can have too many tools at our disposal when it comes to achieving our financial goals and creating our dream life, but if you should ever find yourself looking at all those different strategies, spending days, weeks, or even months trying to catalog all of them in your head and figure out how to get them to fit into your perfect financial plan, to the point that it starts to significantly delay you from taking action, then it's time to take a step back, because no goal was ever accomplished without action, and no financial plan is going to be perfect right from the start. Much better in practice to make sure that you get the big things right, and then correct course on the little things as you go along. Because while in many situations the tips from these content creators, including myself, are great at helping us to optimize our financial situations and allow us to get to our goals as quickly as humanly possible, not all of them are actually necessary to get a successful, albeit not perfect, plan going. And when I say not all of them are actually needed, I mean that because you might actually be surprised at how many financial situations could be almost entirely solved with just a few small tweaks. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, because it's amazing how many different places you can find insights into how you can better your own financial situation. Oftentimes they come from the strangest of places that seem to have nothing to do with money on the surface whatsoever. For example, today's video was inspired by a man named Vilfredo Pareto, an Italian economist who made an observation that over the years has become very popular in many arenas, from productivity to engineering and beyond. It's known as Pareto's Principle, or the law of the vital few, or perhaps most commonly, the 80-20 rule. And it can have an astonishing effect on our finances if we start viewing our financial picture, and particularly our budgets, through the lens of Pareto's idea. For those who don't already know, the main idea behind the Pareto Principle is that inputs and outputs are not evenly distributed across activities. In other words, it says that the majority of your results are going to come from the minority of your time and effort. It's been said that Pareto first discovered this idea when he noticed that the vast majority of the pea pods in his garden were coming from a very small portion of the seeds that he planted. When he looked at other things in the world, he noticed that this pattern appeared all over the place. For instance, in addition to Pareto's garden, he noticed that about 80% of the land in Italy was owned by roughly 20% of the population, and 80% of the wealth generated in the US was created by about 20% of the population. The numbers have obviously changed a bit since he made his discovery known, and in many cases the ratios have become even more severe. For example, distributions of 90% to 10%, 95% to 5%, and 99% to 1% are not uncommon. Think about income inequality in America. What are the super rich often referred to as? The top 1%, right? And the majority of income created in the country is generated by those high income earners. So while the percentages may change depending on what you look at, the fundamental idea that I want to get across to you remains the same. The majority of your results will usually come from a small portion of your efforts. So how can we apply this to our finances, you ask? Well, take a look at your budget and look real closely at where you're spending your money. Is there 1, 2, or maybe 3 places where a very large portion of your money is going? I'll bet for most of you there is. It may differ from one person to the next, but some common areas that will probably come up for a good portion of us would be housing, food, transportation, insurance, and, depending on your situation, possibly debt. But how much of a difference can we make in our financial lives if we focus the vast majority of our efforts in controlling and optimizing those few categories that are controlling the majority of our financial situation? In most cases, it can be quite a lot. Let's take a look at how this could work. John and Jane, like a lot of us, are experiencing quite a bit of financial stress in their day-to-day lives. They make pretty decent money, taking home about $60,000 a year between the two of them, but they're still living paycheck to paycheck. They have no money to put towards their savings, and understandably, they're looking to get their heads above water. So let's take a look at their budget and see how we could help them do that. John and Jane's budget has the following categories: housing, transportation, food, insurance, household and personal care, entertainment, and debt. The total costs for each category are $3,000 a month for housing, largely because they rent an apartment in an expensive area, and this number does include utilities, $800 a month towards their monthly minimum payments on their debt, which are split between a car loan of John's, a student loan of Jane's, and some credit card debt. $500 a month for food, which includes expenses of going out to eat once a week, $450 a month towards transportation expenses, $215 a month towards insurance, $95 a month towards housing supplies and personal care items, and $15 a month towards entertainment, which for John and Jane is basically going to see a movie once a month. In total, their monthly expenses currently average about $5,075 a month, meaning they're actually falling behind by an additional $75 a month based on their income. And that's not a good thing, considering that much of that shortfall is likely to be put on their credit card, which will only increase their debt payments and put them further behind financially as time goes along. But thankfully, there are a few things that John and Jane could do to improve their situation. They could do what many of us feel we're forced to do, and that's to look at what we would consider discretionary expenses and limit or cut those out to make up for the $75 that they're falling short every month. In that case, we would look at the movie tickets that John and Jane buy each month and cut that out completely, saving $15. We'd probably look deeper into their personal care category and see that they pay $30 a month for haircuts that they could possibly handle themselves, as well as spending $25 a month for a pair of local gym memberships. Cutting both of those would save an additional $55 a month and nearly get them to the point where they're breaking even. To get the rest of the way to our goal, we could have John and Jane eat out once every other week or something instead of once a week. That would get their heads back above water, but it's not going to do much to move the needle for them in terms of giving or saving for their futures, both of which, of course, they haven't been able to do at all given their current financial situation. It's also likely not going to be sustainable, let alone enjoyable, for very long. Because in order to get their heads above water, we're essentially taking away most of the things that they enjoy spending their money on, which is doubly tough considering there wasn't much of that to begin with. Now, it is possible that John and Jane will be able to find other things that they enjoy as much, if not more so, that don't cost them money at all, as I've discussed in previous videos, and if that's the case, then they could turn all these seemingly negative cuts into blessings in disguise. But if they don't manage to do that, then they're likely headed for a swift failure by approaching their budgets this way. Another thing that they could do is work some extra hours. That would get their heads back above water, possibly without having to cut any of their expenses like we did before, and that may very well work if they can consistently get the hours. That's not really saying much because they are making good money. 1 or 2 hours of overtime per week would probably be enough for them to break even. But again, this wouldn't do much in terms of moving the needle when it comes to their savings. At their current level of expenses, assuming they were to retire today, they would need to have over $1.5 million in order to be considered financially independent according to the 4% rule. Given that they currently have zero retirement savings, they will need to be investing about $500 a month at an average 8% annual rate of return for the next 40 years to reach that goal. If they're young and just starting their careers with no desire to retire early, that may very well be fine, but if they're older, they may not have that much time. So while the plan may work well in the short term when it comes to just getting their head above water financially, it would be more ideal if we could target those areas that are costing John and Jane the most and try to optimize them in order to free up more money and make reaching financial independence easier. So let's start with their housing, because nearly 60% of their budget is going towards it every month, so we have a great opportunity to free up some serious cash. There's not a whole lot that they can do to affect the going rates for rent in their area, but depending on their situation, they may be able to move somewhere cheaper and significantly slash their housing expenses that way. But that's understandably not always a viable option for all of us. If that's the case, then what they may need to do is take advantage of some sort of rent hacking. Whether that's by doing something like buying a triplex somewhere in the area, living in one unit and renting out the others, or just living with additional roommates and splitting the cost of the apartments, or renting out their house if they had that on Airbnb or somewhere similar. Whatever the case may be, it could significantly improve John and Jane's financial situation, without ever actually having to cut anything from their budgets, or eventually having to kill themselves working so much overtime week in and week out for 40 years long so that they could save that $500 a month. But anyway, after utilities are included, John and Jane are currently paying about $3,000 a month for their apartment. After a little searching, they find a 3-bedroom apartment that would cost them roughly $5,000 a month after utilities are accounted for, as well as some good roommates that they can split the costs with. This makes John and Jane's portion of the housing costs come in at $1,667 a month. This not only gets their head above water financially, but it also gives them quite a bit of money, about $1,250 a month in this hypothetical scenario, to either pay off their debts and further lower their expenses going forward, or to save and invest each month. Even if we assume the balances on their debts are $2,500 on the credit card, $10,000 on the car loan, and $15,000 on the student loan, with interest rates of 15% on the credit card, 5% on the car, and 4.5% on the student loans, they could be debt-free in this scenario in just 1 year and 2 months, thanks to the money that they've now freed up from their rent hacking. They could do it even sooner if they picked up some extra hours during that time or sell some things to kickstart their process, or both. But even without that, after paying off all their debts, John and Jane would have about $2,050 a month left over after expenses to give, save, and enjoy. All because they chose to take advantage of the 80-20 rule of money with their budget, and controlled those few vital categories that were truly damaging their financial present and future. What's more is that in addition to having so much more money left over than they had before, they would also have a much easier time reaching financial independence with this new arrangement. Now that their expenses have been lowered from about $5,075 a month down to about $2,950 a month, they would only need roughly $885,000 in savings to be considered financially independent, according to the 4% rule, instead of the $1.5 million that they needed before. Hypothetically, if John and Jane invested half of their leftover cash each month, or $1,025, towards their retirements and got that same 8% return on average, they would become financially independent in 23 years and 6 months, instead of the nearly 40 years that it took them before. If they were to invest all of their money that they had left over, they would cut that time down even further, becoming financially independent in just 16 years and 7 months. One way or another, that's quite a big difference if you ask me, especially considering that it came from just a couple of small tweaks to their budget. So that's the Pareto Principle and how I think it can help us look at our financial pictures with a little more clarity. But what do you think about the idea? Do you think it could help you on your own finances? Are there any other benefits to using this rule for our budgets that you think I've missed? Let me know in the comments section below, and thanks for watching.